Breaking tonight, 2 Australian Border Force officers test positive to coronavirus on the front line. Police hit a Sydney backpackers enforcing new anti-COVID rules. The Qantas flight from Sydney to Adelaide turned around mid-air because of a coronavirus cluster at Adelaide Airport.
This is 7 News with Angela Cox.
Good evening. 2 Australian Border Force officers have tested positive to the COVID-19 virus. One was located in New South Wales, the other in Queensland. Border Force says contact tracing with other officers is tonight underway and that appropriate support is being offered to their immediate colleagues. The agency is at the forefront of operations at the nation's ports. It's not a lockdown, but the crackdown is on across the country. Tonight in Sydney, we've seen another example of backpackers behaving badly. A group of young travellers drinking together on a hostel rooftop, a clear breach of the tough new rules designed to keep people safe. Amber Laidler is outside the King's Cross hostel for us tonight. Amber, police have acted.
Yes, Ange, police were called here just after 7 o'clock after a concerned neighbour tipped them off to a large gathering that was taking place on the rooftop of this backpackers hostel behind us here. And he had good reason to be concerned. This gathering was in breach of the strict new social guidelines that have been imposed by the state government. There was no social distancing and there was more than 2 people on that rooftop. They were quick to act, though. Police arrived here saying that they were responding to a noise complaint, but our cameras were there as they went upstairs and quickly dispersed the crowd.
And Amber, has anyone been charged?
No, Ange, it appears police were feeling somewhat generous tonight. We know anyone who breaches these new guidelines can face up to $11,000 in fines and potentially 6 months in prison. But they say that tonight no charges have been laid and the management and guests of this hostel were simply issued with a warning. We have spoken to a few of the backpackers staying here. They're arguing that they weren't in breach of the guidelines because they say they're all residents of this hostel. They were with people from their own household, but I'm not sure that excuse would fly with government, considering we are seeing so many of those common seating areas being closed in both hotels and in shopping centres. But tonight they were lucky to be let off with a warning, Ange.
Lucky indeed. OK, thanks so much, Amber. It's not just Sydney. Right around the nation, police patrols are bringing a sharper edge to the health restrictions. Tonight, the number of fines handed out is on the rise. There's also the risk of jail time.
For days, we've been warned. Now the coronavirus crackdowns commenced. Dishing out fines, police in parks, where social distancing was a distant priority.
Are you saying this is right now really illegal?
This is what you're doing is technically illegal, yeah.
Okay, so I literally did not know. It's so confusing.
Ignorance is no defence in law, and these new restrictions are now legal orders. In New South Wales, leaving your house without a reason is a crime.
Very dramatic restrictions. They're restrictions the like of which we have never seen in Australia before.
There's only 6 valid reasons: medical, compassion visits, exercise, work, education and shopping for essentials. In Melbourne, police focused their attention on businesses breaking the rules, hitting the unfortunately named China Bar and handing out Victoria's first fine for breaching antivirus controls, almost $10,000 for providing table service.
We know that that is a significant fine, especially in these times when businesses are struggling.
In Brisbane, the unwanted honour of the first fine went to this massage parlour.
Offering massage service during COVID-19.
Police say it was being run as an illegal brothel, clearly contravening social distancing. The owner and a worker hit with infringements.
$1,334 fine. And one for a business as well for failed to comply with the public health direction. And that fine was $6,672.
Big penalties, but the cost of non-compliance could be much greater. The spread of the virus and more lives lost. Across the country, there's been 4,513 cases of coronavirus and 19 deaths. Daily increases are down, but so is testing.
So there's the weekend effect, the access to general practitioners over the weekend.
But to keep infections under control, the message will need to sink in to those still filling the nation's parks, playgrounds and beaches.
This is the time for all of us who don't need to be out and about to remain in our own home so that we minimise spread.
And the time for excuses,
Just trying to have fun,
has run out. Joel Dry, 7 News.
A Qantas domestic flight bound for Adelaide has been turned around mid-air and returned to Sydney. Passengers on the near-empty flight were told the decision was made after several staff at Adelaide Airport contracted coronavirus.
We found out just before we landed that it was because of the baggage handlers had a problem.
A cluster has been confirmed at the airport with 6 baggage handlers testing positive. The airport is being thoroughly disinfected and passengers have been urged to clean their luggage. We're told Australia will need every hospital bed it can get. Now, a landmark deal has been signed by the federal government to ensure private hospitals stay open through the pandemic. The agreement will mean tens of thousands of doctors, nurses and beds in private hospitals can help in the corona battle.
Building surge capacity by temporarily turning private hospitals public.
To guarantee that we can fight to protect every life of every Australian.
Many facing closure, their wards emptied by the elective surgery ban. Australia's 657 private hospitals will now direct their 30,000 beds and 105,000 staff, including 57,000 nurses and midwives, into the public system, including a third of Australia's intensive care unit beds.
It dramatically expands the capacity of the Australian hospital system.
The cost?
An additional $1.3 billion.
It will double the number of ventilated intensive care beds from 2,200 to 4,400.
At the moment, we are using just over 20 of those for patients who are suffering from COVID-19.
But demand could jump in coming weeks.
Now is not the time to take the foot off the pedal.
As employers put their feet firmly on the pedal for the $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper allowance, more than 250,000 businesses signing up in just the first day. From Labor, good, but late.
If this had been done when we were first calling for it, there are hundreds of thousands of people who might not have had their lives turned upside down over the last 2 weeks.
Others are positive.
Australia lost 1 million jobs last week. This big announcement buys most of those jobs back.
And small business says that's what it will do.
Whereas before I was saying you've got to save your business, put your workers off, now we're saying you can keep them on.
But attacking the commercial landlord giants.
Westfields, we've got Stocklands, they are a disgrace and they should hang their heads in shame and they will pay for this.
Pay for asking retailers to pay full rent despite shops closing.
We talk about being in a war, which we are. They are the first group of traitors that we've come across.
The landlords say they've agreed to discuss the issue. Mark Riley, 7 News.
2 more passengers from the corona-infected Ruby Princess cruise ship have died from the virus. The vessel is still sitting off the New South Wales coast. Paramedics took another 3 crew members to hospital overnight. Now police have stepped in with a blunt warning to foreign cruise liners. Go home.
Another medical retrieval again. The Ruby Princess, already overrun with coronavirus, now answerable for 10% of New South Wales cases. Water Police called so doctors and paramedics could treat 3 more crew, bringing them ashore and onto hospital. At a time when police and paramedics are already stretched, the Commissioner had a blunt message for the 9 cruise ships refusing to leave our coast.
They don't pay taxes in Australia. They don't park their boats in Australia. Their primary flags are often in the Caribbean in different islands. Time to go home.
It was the 3rd time in 3 days the Ruby Princess came close to shore for medical reasons. The company adamant there was no breach of maritime law, today urging the government to repatriate all crew members on board. There's fresh criticism tonight too of the botched handling of the return of passengers from the Norwegian Spirit last week, at a time when other passengers were being forced into a fortnight of hotel lockdown. These passengers were allowed to go home to self-isolate after catching onward flights around Australia.
We know that there are significant numbers of COVID-19 cases coming off these cruise ships, but no one seems to know whose responsibility it is.
A number of authorities had jurisdiction in relation to those matters.
The Premier today sharing around the blame for the inconsistent approach.
It's important for us to make sure that all these cruise ships are aware of their obligations.
A topic she'd rather cut short and move on from. Evan Batten, 7 News.
We've seen Australian states close borders, but tonight Western Australia will ban travel within the state. It's a measure WA's Premier says has never been attempted anywhere in the country. Rob Scott reports from one of Perth's northern borders.
At midnight tonight, local time, WA will be divided into 9 regions. And each of those regions will essentially be treated like its own country, with travel between them strictly controlled. There will be random checkpoints and roadblocks at the borders of each. Police will patrol major transport routes. You'll only be allowed to move across a border if you're deemed an essential worker or if you provide an essential service, if it's for a medical reason or on compassionate grounds. Anyone caught crossing borders without a valid reason could face fines of up to $50,000.
Now, I know some people will be frustrated. It won't be perfect because it's something that's never happened in WA or indeed, I think, anywhere in Australia ever before.
The regional crackdown will mean families will be separated. Natalie Valance lives in WA's Wheatbelt region. Her 4 children and 7 grandchildren live in Perth. They won't be able to see each other, possibly for weeks, unless there's an emergency. But Natalie is fully supportive of the rules.
Of course, it's upsetting. But if we're going to conquer this coronavirus, we have to do it sooner rather than later.
The WA government is also attempting to rush new legislation through the Parliament this week that will give police the power to force those who refuse to self-isolate to wear electronic tracking devices so they can keep tabs on them at all times.
If you know someone in Bali tonight, message them to come home or they could spend months there. The holiday hotspot has declared a state of emergency until at least the end of May. The federal government has no plans to evacuate Australians. Tourists who don't make the last flights out will be stranded there indefinitely. The warning comes as Bali announces 9 new coronavirus cases. It started in positive territory, but our share market couldn't hang on to early gains in another rollercoaster day. Here's Network Finance Editor Gemma Acton.
Angela, it was today's big rise and fall caps off a month of extreme swings for shares. Despite climbing as much as 3.6% higher in the first hour of trade today, the ASX 200 ended up closing lower by 2%. That makes March the worst single month for the index since back in October 1987. It's also the worst 3-month period since then. Shares have now fallen by 24% so far this year. And in more bad news, Angela, a leading consumer confidence survey today reported its weakest result since it first began back in 1973. Angela.
The coronavirus outbreak in Spain shows few signs of easing tonight, with more grim details revealed. Hugh Whitfield is in London for us. Hugh, hundreds more people have been struck down by COVID-19.
And another bad day right across Europe. In Spain, they were hoping that the curve and the trends were beginning to work in their favour. Unfortunately, they have not. Spain has just experienced its deadliest day of the coronavirus crisis so far. 849 people killed by the virus in 24 hours. That brings the total number of deaths there to more than 8,100. And the number of infections has now surpassed China, 94,417, making it one of the most badly affected countries in the world. In Belgium, a 12-year-old girl has become the youngest person in Europe to die from COVID-19 so far. Here in Britain, the death toll does continue to rise. There are big concerns about the lack of protective equipment for health workers and the fact that there is a lack of testing for health workers as well, as many of them fall ill. And reports too that Prince William has signalled he's willing to return to the air ambulance to help out in this crisis. In terms of global travel, well, it is becoming harder and harder to move around the world. British Airways has just suspended all of its flights from London's Gatwick Airport. It is the UK's second busiest airport. It is now only operating for 8 hours a day between 2 and 10 p.m. And EasyJet has already grounded all of its flights worldwide. Ange?
OK, thanks so much, Hugh. America has just suffered its deadliest 24 hours of this crisis, with the death toll soaring above 3,000. More than 500 people died in a single day, almost half of them in New York. Paul Kadak toured the makeshift hospital being built in Central Park.
Under the cold New York sky, work is feverishly underway, turning one of the world's most famous parks into a field hospital.
I had never imagined or fathomed in all of my disaster experience for the last 10 years that we would actually be setting up in Central Park in New York City.
Tent after tent, bed after bed, volunteer run with its own intensive care unit and built in just 2 days.
The coronavirus patients will come here via the main hospital over the road. They'll start taking those patients from tomorrow, and they say by the end of tomorrow they'll be full.
As another city landmark welcomed a wave of hope and help, Navy hospital ship Comfort docking in New York Harbour, bringing relief to the city's buckling health system and its mayor.
How does it feel to see her here?
It's very inspiring. It really gives us hope.
Watching the arrival, Aussie star Hugh Jackman was giving thanks.
To all the doctors, all the nurses, and everyone involved with the Navy, thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are amazing.
What you see us going through here, you will see happening all across this country.
It already is. The nation's suffering through its deadliest day yet. Latest projections, up to 200,000 could die. A best-case scenario if social distancing is maintained. Some still aren't getting the message. A Florida pastor arrested for hosting mass church services. In New York, Paul Carrack, 7 News.
Athletes around the world are adjusting their calendars tonight with the International Olympic Committee announcing a new start date for the Tokyo Games. The Olympics will now begin on the 23rd of July next year, with the Paralympics to start on the 24th of August. Organisers had no choice but to postpone the Games for the first time in history due to the pandemic.
This is a huge challenge and it's unprecedented. We don't have a blueprint. We have no experts to refer to.
The World Athletics and Swimming Championships scheduled for next year are set to be pushed back to 2022. Supermarket anxiety. It's now a modern part of shopping. Next, how to navigate the aisles and feed the family safely. Pollution levels drop as cities and economies around the globe shut down. And a message to the world tonight from the ancient pyramids. More bottle shops have imposed limits to stop people panic buying booze. The most you can now buy: 2 cases of beer, a dozen bottles of wine and 2 bottles of spirits. Retail chains including Liquorland and Vintage Cellars are following Dan Murphy's and BWS, which have already imposed restrictions. In the past week, there's been an 86% jump in alcohol spending. Coronavirus has dramatically changed the way we live, and now scientists are recording sudden changes in our environment. Pollution levels in our seas and skies appear to be dropping.
We've been forced to change the way we learn, work and interact.
A crisis that has really brought out the vulnerabilities in our global system.
But it's the way we travel, or at least how we used to, which has drastically changed our environment.
There's a significant reduction in the pollutant emissions, especially the pollutant emissions that are tied to traffic.
In almost every major city, air quality is improving. This is Beijing today versus this time last year. The Copernicus satellite shows the residue of fuel burnt in cars, trucks, factories and power plants. Here, illustrating the rapid drop in China coinciding with its nationwide quarantine. Over Europe, a similar story.
We can clearly see the shutdown of the industry, and what used to be a very polluted region of northern Italy now, from the satellite images, seems much more cleaner.
In Brisbane, the air quality before COVID was defined as good. Now,
the air quality here is really good.
Same for Sydney and Melbourne, but history suggests it won't last. This graph shows the steady increase in global emissions since 1990. You can see between 2008 and 2009 there was an immediate but very slight decline experienced during the last recession. But from 2010, emission levels started rising again. Once this pandemic's over, it's predicted emissions will rise as the world returns to business as usual. Tom Hartley, 7 News.
Australians are tonight being urged to get the annual winter flu jab earlier this year to try to keep our hospitals free for the coronavirus fight. The vaccine won't stop you catching COVID-19, but experts say it will help reduce the spread of influenza, which can lower immunity and make people vulnerable to other illnesses. The jab is free for the very young and old, as well as pregnant women. Sourcing and preparing meals for the family is now a much tougher task than normal. But there are a few simple steps to ensure you can stay safe no matter what you choose to eat. Seven's Melissa Doyle explains.
Once upon a time, a trip to the supermarket wasn't exactly something that required much thought. But now, buying dinner for the family represents one of the biggest challenges many of us face in a day. As it stands, dining out is out. The remaining options include cooking for yourself or getting takeaway. Both are relatively risk-free if the proper precautions are taken. If you're headed to your local supermarket, wash your hands directly before and after your shop. Many supermarkets provide hand sanitizer at the door. Be sure to use it. Treat all surfaces as if they are contaminated. This not only includes your trolley, but also the packaging of food, which may have been handled by other shoppers. The food itself is fine, just make sure it's washed and cooked properly. So what about getting food delivered? Well, many delivery apps like Uber Eats now have a leave at the door option. The driver will place the food on the ground, ring the doorbell, then walk away. This ensures both parties have no direct contact. Once you get the food inside, put it immediately onto your own clean plate or bowl and, where possible, eat with cutlery, not your hands. There is no denying these are strange times we are living in, but by following a few simple precautions, you can keep you and your family as safe as possible.
It is a modern virus, but tonight a message from an ancient landscape. The words "stay home" projected onto the Giza pyramids. As well, a message of appreciation to all medical staff who are working to keep the country safe. Sentiments echoed around the globe this evening. Next, we check the forecast right across the country. Plus, the moment a kangaroo was rescued from the drink on the Gold Coast. Working from home had unexpected benefits for this kangaroo who was in trouble on the Gold Coast. Residents in Runaway Bay spotted the animal struggling in deep water in the canal. They launched a rescue operation on kayak and jet ski and were able to safely capture it.
And we were having a bit of a joke about social distancing and how we were maintaining it.
The lucky roo was seen hopping away after a good rest. Good on him. Now, let's get a check of the weather across the country. Here's Tony Auden.
Thank you, Ange. It's been quiet for the main population centres today. The exception, a few storms over southeastern Queensland, though they cleared away pretty quickly. Onto the satellite, the trough triggering those few storms in Queensland was the same system that brought some wet weather to New South Wales over the past day, while cloud and storms are also building across central parts of Australia. Tomorrow, that cloud band creeps east. It'll gather a little bit of steam on Thursday, bringing some rain along the east coast. In the meantime, just a few showers for those coast locations, while there's a moderate chance we'll see a tropical cyclone in the northern parts of the Coral Sea by Friday, but it is expected to stay well away from the Australian coast. On to tomorrow's forecast, a mostly sunny Wednesday in Brisbane, a cooler top of 29 degrees, a shower or two in Sydney, 25 degrees on the cards, some patchy cloud and 25 also in Canberra, make that 24 in Melbourne, some pleasant autumn conditions on the way there. A late shower is possible, but not a high enough chance to include on the icons here. Further south, Adelaide's looking cloudy, also with a possible late shower, 15 up to a top of 23 degrees. Into Thursday, it all ramps up a bit. Storms running from Darwin through central parts of the country, including Alice Springs, then across to eastern states, including Sydney and Canberra. A bit of rain in the mix there, cooling conditions down to just 19 degrees. A couple of breaks in the cloud could keep Sydney up around 25 degrees. Rain also in Hobart, falls up to 25 millimetres are possible, 14 to a top of 18 degrees there. In Melbourne, showers start to pick up. Adelaide stays dry on 23 degrees, and in Perth, a possible sprinkle with the top of 24. That's the latest weather. Ange, let's back to you.
And that is the very latest from 7 News this evening. Your next bulletin is coming up at 5 a.m, followed by Sunrise. I'm Angela Cox. Enjoy the rest of your evening.